Hi, this is Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV. Welcome to this episode of Legislative Update. Believe it or not, we're now in month 6 of the COVID pandemic here in Massachusetts, and we find ourselves balancing ongoing responses with keeping other elements of our world, like state budgets, moving forward. Today, I'm here with State Senator Julian Cyr and State Rep Sarah Peak to get an update on all things legislative. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, Teresa.
Thank you, Teresa.
So we are in month 6 of COVID time now. Hard to believe. And we've kind of gone from the immediate emergency response to trying to figure out how to keep things moving forward with this as an ongoing state. How's that working for you guys up in the legislature?
Well, like every other industry, we had to figure out how we were going to get together and vote and debate. And more than just vote, I mean, to have robust debates. And we have done that. It's more cumbersome than being together in person, but through sort of a call-in, using conference call lines, having a separate line for the debate line and that type of thing, we're able to hold legislative sessions. And we've done some very significant pieces of legislation as a result of it that are now in conference committee. And we expect to go back in the fall to take a final vote on the conference committee report. So directly related to COVID, we've done some stuff around telehealth. Also, we did a very large economic development bill that touches on a lot of areas that COVID sort of laid bare where there's a need. And primary among that is childcare and how we pay for it and who has access to it and all of that. So there's some important stuff in that bill, and we're going to continue to be able to work on.
Can we talk about that a little bit more? Because childcare is such on everyone's minds right now. We've got school and childcare, and how do we get back to normal? And it's a really big topic.
That's right, and it's an expensive topic. And what's interesting is I think this is the moment in time when we can really make a significant difference, because you have business owners, both small and multinational corporations, coming to the table saying, hey, we need to partner with government in order to make childcare work, because we realize we don't have a workforce if there is no childcare. So in this bill, it does a couple of things. It sets up a 19-person task force with a short timeline to do work. There will be people appointed from all over the state, and Julian and I are already thinking about whose name we're going to put forward to make sure that we're represented here on Cape Cod. One of the things we identified here on the Cape is many of the smaller providers, there is money and has been money available under the CARES Act and through some state grants as well. But if you run an operation with maybe 1 or 2 employees and maybe a dozen kids or even just 6 kids, you don't have the bandwidth to be able to ferret out where that money might be, fill out a grant application, and get it all submitted. So I got an earmark in the bill for $100,000, I think it is, for the Cape Cod Commission, who's a willing partner in this, to provide sort of that back office services for the child care providers across the state. And I think that could really be a game changer for us here on the Cape.
You know, Teresa, what COVID-19 has really revealed is gaps and sort of cracks that we knew before, right? When you know, we knew that there was a real sort of challenge in the early education space, both from, you know, what we sort of pay the workforce, access, how families, you know, be able to afford it. And COVID-19 has just revealed and sort of exposed it to be sort of a real gaping fissure that we need to address. And the legislature, I think, has worked hard to do as much as we can. The biggest outstanding piece is where we don't have information, or we actually, in this case, don't have the hard numbers. And that relates to the budget. So the fiscal budget, sort of the biggest thing we do every year. Traditionally, the House would take up that budget in April, the Senate would take it up in May, we'd reconcile it in June, it's signed into law in July. Because we've not had a lot of information, one, I think we're still getting our hands around what the revenues are going to be for this fiscal year. But the really biggest unknown factor and what has really paused our work is the real unknown of what the federal government's going to do. So the uncertainty around a federal response gives a lot of uncertainty in our budget. We estimate there's about we expect there to be a $6 billion gap in revenue for FY21 US for July 31st. Just for some context, that's about double the revenue gap that we saw during the Great Recession years. So we're talking about a whole host of pain, right? If we can't fill that gap.
And that's out of a also for context. Sorry to interrupt, Julian. Out
No,
of
please.
$42 billion budget, a $6 billion gap. I mean, this is a large piece of
Astronomical.
Right, just percentage,
And
that's significant.
it's very significant. And depending on what the federal government actually does, we could be living in, we could have sort of different realities, right? So what the U.S. House passed would bring up to potentially $10 billion to Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So that would fill, certainly fill the revenue gap we expect and provide resources to do a whole host of economic development, stimulus, a whole host of activities we're going to need to sort of continue to fight COVID-19 and, recover and reopen. If you look at what the U.S. Senate passed, probably about $2 to $3 billion coming to Massachusetts. It's yet to be reconciled. They've yet to reconcile it, and so we're waiting. We've passed interim budgets to fund the government through the end of October here in Massachusetts, and we've made some really important commitments. We made a commitment that local aid is going to be funded at level funding. So the funding that we received that towns got the prior fiscal year. It's a big deal, especially for some bigger towns, less so on the outer and lower Cape. But the other piece that's really crucial is Chapter 70. So this is the K through 12 education funding that we have committed to fund at maintenance levels as well, plus inflation. So this means that no school in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, K through 12, is going to have to make cuts because of a loss of state funding. So that's a big deal. We expect, I think, timeline-wise, to take up a budget when we have some more information. Hopefully there's an agreement this fall. Even if there isn't an agreement, then we're going to need to move forward, and we'll likely do this fall. I'd probably say, in this sort of October timeframe, the House goes first, then the Senate will take up a budget. But that's sort of the big outstanding piece that we're waiting on. And we've got to wait for the feds to act to figure out what sort of resources we'll have to close the very significant gap we face.
Well, what are we doing, student? Because now at the end of October, you said we've got some funding in place so we can keep functioning.
So we were doing typically we would do like a 1/12 budget.
Right.
But in this case, doing a 1/12 budget isn't appropriate because it's 1/12 of current year's spending. And given this potential shortfall, the $6 billion shortfall, we can't just go ahead and spend 1/12, because at the back end of the year, we would have no money left. So the House and the Senate passed a consensus bill that carries us through the end of October, I believe. And, it funds most agencies, level funds them, readjusts some funding to address the priorities that need to be addressed during COVID. There's money in there for things like to help supply PPE for childcare and school districts and things along those lines. So we have a budget in place. We're not deficit spending between now and the end of October. Interestingly, you may read in the newspapers that, Massachusetts is one of only a handful of states that doesn't yet have its FY21 budget. Well, that's true. But most of the states, the 40 some odd that have enacted budgets, they're calling special and emergency sessions of their legislature to go back in and make cuts and have to redo their budget all over again. So I think that the approach we're taking, and it's the House and Senate chairs of Ways and Means working together along with the Secretary of Administration and Finance to come up with these consensus numbers and consensus revenue numbers. I think it's absolutely the right approach to take.
Do we see any trends right now? I mean, I know there's going to be a huge gap. Everyone knows that. But more recently, do we see any trends as we're starting to stabilize a little bit? Are things economically leveling off? Are we?
Well, it was sort of interesting. So you may recall one of the kind of emergency things we did is we allowed people to delay the payment of their state income tax until the 15th of July. And those numbers came in, and I think that they were better than people expected them to be. Meal tax and room excise tax, those payments are delayed until the 15th of September. So we're not going to get a snapshot of what that looks like. I think everyone, Senator Sear and myself included, thought that this was going to be a quote unquote muted summer. I know I can't make a left turn on Route 6. So I see the no vacancy signs at the motels. And I have friends who have tried to do last minute bookings through Airbnb and Vrbo, and they can't find a place to stay on Cape Cod. So I'm hopeful that what that translates into is revenue coming in from those excise taxes, the meals tax and the room occupancy tax, at a higher level than we thought.
And that impacts both the states, and of course now it impacts the municipalities with last year's new rooms tax.
That's right.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
and even the old rooms tax, there was a piece of that was a local share that came back dollar for dollar. And I think most, if not all, of the towns on the Cape have enacted and adopted the local portion of the meals tax. So this is very important revenue to us. In some ways, it's more important than level funding local aid, because the amount of local aid we get relative to the size of our municipal budgets is relatively small. But in a community like Provincetown, the room excise tax is millions and millions of dollars. So if that takes a hit, it really affects the municipal budgets.
So that's good. So we kind of know where we are through October. We're kind of in a wait and holding plan. I know that you've passed some other things in the meantime as well, some things around healthcare.
Yeah, so there's been a number of efforts around healthcare, even prior to the COVID. Healthcare reform is something we're sort of in the business of here in Massachusetts.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a proud tradition of that. The Senate actually, you may recall, we had passed a package on mental health. This is all pre-pandemic. On mental health reform, we passed a pharmaceutical reform package. And the House is planning to sort of follow suit with their sort of package in the spring. But of course, COVID-19 sort of flipped the world on its head. And so in June, in June, the Senate, and then in July, the House, both chambers moved forward with healthcare reform legislation more narrowly focused on addressing the pandemic. So this sort of is centered around telehealth. So these are services where you're able to get healthcare, where you are, right? You don't have to walk in the doors of a clinic or a doctor's office. That you can get care remotely. It's something, telehealth is a policy actually here in Massachusetts we've been late to adopt. A bunch of other states have done this with much success. We hadn't for a whole host of probably not good reasons, but what's been fascinating is the governor, through an executive order, expanded telehealth. And then the legislature, both the Senate and the House, have passed bills to expand telehealth and do a whole host of other things, provide a lifeline to community hospitals and community health centers. We do a lot of work in the Senate around mental health, around pharmaceutical reform. Rep. Peake actually got a great amendment in the House bill around testing coverage, insurance coverage for COVID-19 related testing. But also all of this is sort of in play to be reconciled in a healthcare reform conference committee. I actually have the honor of serving on that conference committee. So we're working to sort of iron out and figure out these details. But the telehealth piece is probably the most significant. And we see really a number of really interesting metrics now that we've expanded telehealth, albeit it was done through executive order, but what the legislature is seeking to do is sort of enshrine this in law. And the benefits are really overwhelming. And detractors who are concerned about compliance or a whole list of reasons that were sort of used to say, hey, we can't do this. Really, those worst fears haven't come to pass. And what we've seen actually is a drop in no-show rates. So no-show rates, right, when someone has an appointment, say for a behavioral health counseling session, right, and they don't show up. That's a real issue, right? If you're a community health center, through telehealth, that's really plummeted. And so we're actually seeing broader access to care through telehealth. I know I've relied on healthcare, on telehealth through the pandemic with my healthcare provider, and it's been seamless. It's been awesome. I've been able to get the care that I need with a whole host less hassle, and it's actually, I think, providing better care for people. So that's sort of the aim. Traditionally we would end the session on July 31st and would have to have an agreement by July 31st. Because of COVID-19, the legislative session has been the formal sessions, right, been the end of the year. So hoping we have some reconciliation on this healthcare stuff. We've got to get it done by the end of the year, hopefully sooner. And if not, my New Year's plans, I guess, will be working on the conference committee to get it done before midnight on January 1st.
Yeah, Julian and I may be spending New Year's Eve together, but it won't be at a party in Provincetown. It'll be in the
Working on-
legislature, right, with our colleagues running bills back and forth between the House and the Senate, the House and the
Oh my
Senate.
God.
Yeah, they cut a pathway on the floor. So another important thing we did, which is timely right now, is in response to the public health concerns around in-person voting. The House and Senate
Mhm.
took up sort of a voting reform where we are allowing mail-in voting and expanded early voting that includes 2 weekends that people can go in person and vote early. Everybody by now should have received their postcard from the Secretary of State's office. And those have to be returned by, let's see, mail-in. So early voting in person began on Saturday, 8/22, and it runs through Friday, the 28th of August. This is for the September 1st primary. For the general election, which seems oh so far away, but it begins on Saturday, the 17th of October, and runs through Friday, the 30th. The mail-in voting, that postcard you received, it has to get back to the town clerk by 5 p.m. on August 26th. And then you have to make sure that your actual ballot arrives at the town clerk for the primary by the 1st of September. It's a little different with early voting for the general election. The ballot just has to be postmarked November 3rd, which is election day, in order for your vote to be counted. But they have to receive it by the 1st of September. I've heard a lot of concerns from people about, can we trust the post office? They seem to be understaffed. We know they've taken sorting machines out of the South Boston main mixing center there, and all of that. I've read in the Provincetown Independent and done some research on my own. I know at least on the Outer and Lower Cape, every town hall has put a secure box outside that either reads town clerk or town clerk and ballots accepted here. So you can drive to your town hall and have basically a contactless submission of that ballot by putting it in. Or if you can get into your town hall, if they're open for in-person visits, you can take your ballot all in the envelopes that it comes in and actually hand it to the town clerk and vote that way. Or you can put it in the mail, and it's we made sure that the legislature, your tax dollars are picking up the postage, so you don't have to put a stamp on it. You can just mail it back in.
Or you can vote in person. And I actually voted in
person.
When did I vote in person? We had something. Was it a select board race in Truro? And I went and voted, and I was the municipal elections. It was actually remarkably distant, and it felt very safe. Right. And so there's a whole myriad of options for folks to vote. But I think that certainly we wanted to keep social distancing and making sure that people are safe. But having voted in person, just 2 months ago in Truro, it was sort of remarkably safe, and felt really good about all the protocols that were in place there. Right. So a myriad of ways for folks to vote.
Same in Provincetown. And I chose to vote in the primary through the mail-in process because I wanted to actually live through it and see how it would work, how long it would take me to get the ballot back. It's seamless. And if you go to the Secretary of State's website, the Massachusetts Secretary of State's website, and go to the elections division, there's a link there where you can actually track your ballot because everything is barcode scanned. So it's sort of like tracking your package when it gets delivered from Amazon. You can track your ballot and know that it has been received by the local clerk.
I bet most people don't realize that.
That's right. Right.
Very cool. Well, we are actually, as always, almost out of time. Is there anything coming up that you want to give people a heads up on as we wrap up? What are we looking for in the next couple of weeks? Like what's your number one thing that you're thinking, oh my God, I got to deal with this for the next 2 weeks. Got to get through it.
Well, Julian continues to be a rock star in being the public information officer for the Cape Cod Reopening Task Force, and the information that's provided through all these disparate groups working collaboratively. Like I never thought that I would see the head of the Cape and Island Realtors having a conversation about public health initiatives with Sean O'Brien at the county and that type of thing. So, I'll let the senator talk about it because he's the main guy, really.
Well, it's been a real collaborative effort, and I think the Cape Cod Reopening Task Force, right? We're getting everyone in the room, and we've been doing this since the end of April. I think it's been a real advantage for the region, and this is called Legislative Update, and Sarah and my job, a big chunk of our job, right, is going to Beacon Hill, is working, to pass laws But a lot of the work as well is serving as a convener and bringing people together. And
Right.
you know, for Cape Codders, I think we have been able to weather this storm, particularly sort of post surge, right? Post that really tough moment,
Mm-hmm.
tragic sort of moment we had in April and early May. We've been able to weather this a lot better than I expected, considering the very significant number of people that we welcome every year.
Right.
You know, this is sort of a high traffic place in July and August. And I think, you know, I think certainly a lot of credit has to go to just almost everyone really being compliant, following the rules, taking personal responsibility. But a big advantage of it for us, I think, has been working in a real collaborative fashion. You know, when you have, you know, the healthcare community and public health and the business community and elected leaders, you know, really making sure that we're talking about a whole host of issues. Recently, we've turned our gaze to school reopening and, you know, K through 12 schools. You know, the governor and his administration are setting the rules of the road. Individual schools with superintendents and school committees are actually coming up with their plans. But what the Cape Cod Reopening Task Force has done and said, hey, look, we've got a lot of information. We've been following numbers closely on Cape Cod. We've been setting up, you know, rapid response testing protocols. You know, so just last week we set up a webinar, which is actually available if you go to reopeningcapecod.org. There's a whole webinar for teachers and school community members and parents and students if they'd like, looking at what the health data is here in Barnstable County, how we track that data, what testing results, you know, what testing assets we have and how we can deploy them. So that's sort of just an example of the work. So you asked what we're focused on, and you know, COVID-19 and response to COVID-19 is probably going to stay, you know, highest on that list through the duration of the pandemic. We're going to, you know, come back, finish a budget. We've got some conference committees to reconcile, you know, but really we have done better than I expected we would do this summer here on Cape Cod. And I think a big chunk of that has been, you know, people being awesome. A big chunk of that is luck, but a large amount of credit really should go to the collaborative approach we have in the region.
That's awesome. So we're all dealing with the times we're dealing with, but it's nice to have a little bit of sunshine coming through. Thank you guys very much for being here. And I'm looking forward to picking up this sort of conversation next month. This is Teresa Martin from Lower Cape TV, and we have been here for Legislative Update with State Senator Julian Cyr and State Rep Sarah Peak. Thank you guys very much.